All right. All right. Once you get logged in, we're ready to go. Yeah. All right, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We'll get started. Today is February 15th. This is our meeting of the Wake County Board of Education Facilities Committee. I'm glad you're all here. If we have some members that aren't here, I'm hoping that they will come back and watch the recording of this meeting because we're going to cover a lot of important topics today. And so this will be an important opportunity for discussion about some important questions. I do want to make sure that we move along to get to everything on time, but if there is something where you do have a question, please stop us and then we'll go through and make sure everything is answered, okay? Let's jump right into it. Has anyone on the committee had an opportunity to review the agenda? And if so, is there a motion?
I move that we adopt the agenda as provided.
Thank you. Motion by Ms. Edmonds, second by Mr. Hershey. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. And likewise, has anyone had an opportunity to review the minutes of the meeting?
Yes, I can make that motion as well. Motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion again by Ms. Edmonds, second by Mr. Hershey. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the minutes have been approved. So we will get right into it. Our first topic today is existing schools and prioritization of renovations. So as we talk about schools, when people come to you talking about certain maintenance needs in schools, you know, how they're prioritized, where they are scheduled, hopefully this presentation will really get into that process and explain kind of how our prioritization takes place, the factors we look at, and this will be a good opportunity to ask about, you know, how that formula is derived and where we get to where we are. So I'll introduce Mr. Douglas Condon, who's our Program Executive, Facilities Design and Construction. Douglas, anytime you're ready, we'll begin.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all again. Thank you for being here. So we'll wait just a moment for the deck to come up on the monitor. Here we go. So as Mr. Haggerty indicated, we're going to talk about the existing school prioritization process this afternoon, and would like to talk about a few items that we'll cover. Next slide, please. There we go. So just that, we'll talk about the history of the rubric and that process. We will also talk specifically about the process that we utilized last year for 2022. As you know, there were several schools that were named in the 7-year rolling plan. So we'll spend some specific time on the 2022 process. And then we want to make note that in that 7-year rolling process, there are several things that do play a part. It is a data-driven process, but there are some key things that are factored into that process, and those are some of the things that are noted here in this slide, which happen to be enrollment changes, land availability, market conditions, and of course, something that can be an unknown, like a pandemic item, can certainly play a part as well. And then, of course, at the end, happy to take any questions and feedback. In this slide, we take a moment to focus on the collaboration that goes on between district staff and county staff. As you know, the county is a very key partner for everything that we do here in the school district, and we want to make note of some of the key participants. When you think about the CIP team, this is a group that meets twice a month during the part of the year that we're in right now. As we turn the calendar, we go to January until generally about May, depending on a given year. We meet twice a month.
Can you say what CIP is?
Sure, yes, Capital Improvement Plan.
Thank you.
Sure. And there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of material to discuss, a lot of things to bring to you all. So we meet twice a month. And then as we get generally to about May, June, we meet once a month. And these are the key people, these are the key departments that meet in those meetings, that collaborate and provide the information and the recommendations that we ultimately bring to you all at this table. Some of the stakeholder groups that are key, that are involved, you will note below. There certainly are groups like fine arts and other groups that absolutely have a voice and are included in those discussions as well. Next slide. In this slide, we take some time to bring light to the 4 categories that are scored, that are evaluated in this process. And those are the following: campus building condition, health and safety, school choice, and educational adequacy. You'll note that under each of the categories, there is a reference to the respective percentage by which that accounts in the overall score. And as you will note, campus building condition, we've shown that as our anchor because that's the largest percentage of the overall score. And certainly health and safety comes closely behind at 35. So in this slide, let's take a moment and just hit on a couple of things. We've talked a little bit about this afternoon, but these are important to hit again. Building condition and health and safety are the key drivers here. They carry the largest percentages, and I think we could probably all agree that certainly makes sense and is justified. Equity in our school district remains critical and an important component to always consider in the process. Always looking, as always in any evaluation process or in any approach, to look for opportunities to refine or to make some improvements. And then lastly, as indicated earlier this afternoon, there are some other things beyond being data-driven that are factored in to this process. Those enrollment changes, the land, the market, which is, as we know, is ever-changing, and then things like pandemics, others. Next slide. Now, at this point, we'll take a few moments to look at each individual item within the formula. So campus building condition, again, our anchor, our most important component. This is the Facilities Condition Index, so that we're clear what FCI means, okay? And this is the physical condition of the building, of the campus, of the systems, all the key components that are required to operate those buildings and that campus on a daily basis. I won't read or go through every single one of these bullets, but as we can appreciate, these are the critical components. These are the parts and the pieces that are required for us to be code compliant, for us to operate and function on a daily basis. Next slide. Health and safety goes without saying, right? Health and safety critical in our buildings and our campuses. 35% of the overall score. Looking at the top of this, at that first bullet, just to be clear, ADA is American Disabilities Act, as you may know, which went into federal law in 1992. Indoor air quality, always something that's critical to be looking at. And then we touch on some other things like asbestos and lead paint and those building systems. There's a further breakdown that's included in this slide that shows a snapshot into the parts and pieces that ultimately go into that overall score. key components that are certainly very important, like your fire alarm, your security, things of that nature. Next slide. School choice. School choice, 15%, important. And when we look at this slide, important to differentiate that school choice when thinking about things like magnet and year-round objectives. Percentages are provided so that you have an appreciation for what's being discussed here, including some of those objectives like an impact on a base, the market share that that particular school has on that community, crowding, things that are really going to impact a community and things that I'm sure you're going to be hearing about throughout this year in this and other topics. Next slide. There we go. And then finally, educational adequacy, 10% of our overall score. There's a lot here. There are 13 components to this score, and you can see on the far left that each of these are evaluated on a scale of 1 to 5, okay? And ultimately, it talks about things like you're going to hear the term LEGS, which are learning environment guidelines. You're going to hear other things like design guidelines. You're going to hear CTE. You're going to hear important things like OSHA, which are occupational safety and health administration standards. That falls in line with code-related things, making sure that the buildings are as they should be, that we're up to speed and current. Certainly don't expect you to read all of this at this point. There's a lot here. But as we think about things about Department of Transportation, which is the last item, and MSTA, a lot to consider in this category. Next. 2022, as you know, there was a lot that was reviewed. There was a lot that was considered. There was a decision that was made going on almost 2 years ago, 18 months ago. Maintenance and Operations does a great job, and they made a decision to engage a third-party consultant to come in and evaluate the 55 oldest schools in our district. It was an extensive, detailed analysis that took several months. They were on all of those campuses evaluating the schools and the campuses for their FCI. In addition to that, there was an additional analysis done of the top 6 schools on the list that year to try to better determine what we, and I say what we had, meaning the existing condition, what was in a condition when you consider major renovations, what can stay, maybe what cannot, what needs to be demoed. Are you able to swing on site? Important factors in consideration. Again, as we've said, you've got your campus building condition, your health and safety, your school choice, and your educational adequacy. Those are your four areas that are evaluated. It was a long, extensive process. It was data-driven. There were other non-data factors, as discussed earlier this afternoon, that were considered. Long-range planning, real estate services, maintenance and operations, and facilities design and construction met and discussed this extensively multiple times. There were some other factors that were considered, as you can appreciate, ability to swing on site, phasing, which is complex but can be done, and geography, all things that play into the final recommendations. Ultimately, as you can appreciate, any options that were brought to this table had to fit within the county's debt model. It had to make sense and work financially. It was data-driven. Ultimately, 2 options were brought to the table, recommendations, and the decision was voted on by the board, which is the 7-year approved plan that you have at present. In discussion with maintenance and operations, given the in-depth analysis, detailed work that was done by our third-party consultant, the work that was done at that time to evaluate these 55 oldest schools, that data, that analysis is considered good for a 3-year period of time. And that's, again, following the data. What you're hearing today was shared last week with district leadership. We also shared that with our county core team, which includes key members of our district staff as well as county staff. We collaborate with them and meet with them monthly, okay? We met with our CIP team last Friday. We discussed the same information, talked through it, and then, of course, we're here with you all today to share this update. As we look forward, certainly it's an important topic, something that it's an evolving, living, breathing conversation, right? And so we're always looking for that open conversation and looking for refinements, looking for your feedback. Important to note again, it is data-driven. However, note there are other considerations that are non-data in nature, like the phasing, the geography, other things that need to be considered. Certainly thinking about pressing forward into the future, what are some of those considerations? And then moving forward as we think about the calendar, we think about, next month, we'll be providing an update on the cost model for this year. We'll be coming back in late March or early April with an update on the executive summary, which is that rolling 7-year plan, okay? And then when we're here 2 months from now, we will be doing a review, as we discussed last month, on the process, what we've brought to you, what we've discussed, and where we go from there, if we're in agreement that it's ready to go for approval. And with that, happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Douglas. So what I want to do is, you've got a lot of information, but you may not have the context for it yet. When we've brought this discussion before, we had a whole meeting going through everything, and we showed the scoring, we showed the lists, we showed individual schools. So I want to go through a couple questions just that I've received coming into the board meeting.
Sure.
And then we'll open it up for questions that individual board members have. So Douglas, I want to make sure that everyone understands this rubric, this prioritization is for renovations and replacements, right?
Yes.
What exactly is that? Is that just, hey, I have a school in my area that needs a new HVAC, or is it a complete tear down? What are renovations and replacements?
So we're talking on a replacement would certainly mean exactly what you would think it would mean, right? It would mean that the building does not have redeeming conditions or quality left, and it would need to be wholly replaced. A major renovation would mean that not the entire building, okay, but the majority of that existing building would be renovated. And that could mean the building systems, that could mean the roof, that could certainly mean the finishes, but it's not an entire project, an entire construction project, the entire building.
Thanks. And just, when we introduced it, we talked about the CIP. So just as a reminder, where does the money come from for these renovations and replacements?
Sure. So as you know, we have a 7-year rolling capital improvement plan. Last November, the bond was passed by our voters, by our Wake County voters, and that covers years FY '24 and '25. Okay, that's the approved bond. The major renovations are included with that, as well as the new construction. As we look forward then into future years, there will be other bond years, but for '24 and '25, that's what's included. So anything that's shown in that 7-year plan that's under '24 and '25 is included in what was approved in November.
So when we talked about the CIP at our last meeting, right, we talked about the majority of the funds are bond funds. There are other
Yes.
funds that come in, but it's a limited pool.
Yes.
So given that we have a limited pool, about how many of these replacements or renovations can we complete in a year?
Well, when we look at the list, if you look at the current list, and I'm just doing a quick number count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 schools right now that are on the 7-year rolling plan for major renovations over a 7-year period of time. So to give some context to the timing, it generally takes about 2 years to go through the design process, okay? And it, depending on whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school. Elementary process for construction is generally about 16 months. Middle's longer, a little bit longer, more like 20, and then high school can be 24. Because as you can appreciate, there's a lot more to that project with parking and athletics and other items in the scope of work.
So just to be clear, what you're saying is that over the course of 7 years, we're funded for 10 renovations or replacements.
And important to note that depending when it starts, they could be at various stages, meaning that something could be completed 100%, meaning in that 7-year period, something could be designed and constructed, right? Or something could be designed. It just depends which year the funding for that school gets.
And our funding is limited by what's available in the CIP.
That's correct.
Okay. So the list of the order of the renovations, that's in the CIP. And to remind everyone, like if you were curious where a particular school might have fallen, when we've taken all of these factors that you went through, FCI, health and safety, school choice, educational advocacy, everything has been scored and weighted and then ranked. Where would a board member be able to find what the schedule is, like the top 10 that are in the CIP, but then it's like the NCAA, the next 4 in, next 4 out.
That's right. So there's a list of top 25 overall that was provided last, I think it was April, when it was presented to the board. So that was public information. Can certainly be provided again.
Okay, because I think maybe some of the board members would be interested
Sure.
in that if they weren't on the board then. Great. All right, and so then just a couple final ones on there. We said these are for major replacements and renovations, but what if there are improvements that we need at a school? Maybe it's just an HVAC system, or maybe it's maybe not so much a roof, but we've talked about like a security vestibule. Would that go through this process, or would funds for those improvements come through a maintenance plan, or where would those come from?
So when we're talking partial, that's not even on a scale of what we would call a major renovation. As you'll note, when you look at the 7-year plan, one of the categories is for life cycle, okay? And as you've described, could be roof, could be system, could be something more partial in nature. The life cycle projects that are scheduled, that are going to occur, are planned out 36 months in advance, okay? Are funded, are ready to go. Now, that's not to say if there's an emergency and it were reviewed and it were deemed to be something that were critical, that were emergent, a different process, understandably, would be followed, okay? As it relates to security, those projects are being reviewed and are funded via a separate process.
And then, I guess, two last points, and then we'll open it up. So, for example, if there was an emergency, say there was a health condition at a school, what's the process? Obviously, our board members will hear from families with concerns.
Sure.
The school, I'm sure, is aware of it and has probably taken it through channels, but just so people know what those channels are, if someone comes to a board member with, say, mold in a trailer, or, here's leaking sewage pipes, or other, issues that could really have a strong health impact, what's the process for reporting that or for getting that scheduled?
Sure. So appropriate process would be to reach out to maintenance and operations, certainly if you haven't put in a ticket, to do that. If it's something that's certainly more urgent or serious, reaching out directly at the same time with M&O and discussing and making sure they're aware of the situation and that it can be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question, and this gets a little bit off replacement and renovations, but I think it's topical to what we've been talking about, and I've gotten a lot of questions about it. Where we would have a major addition or improvement to not just a school, but something district-wide. For example, we've seen security improvements at different schools and other districts, right? And we have a safety and security audit. Topic will be coming up in our safety and security committee, where we've looked at specific improvements that might be recommended for the district. If we were to have district-wide improvements regarding like the visitor management system, vestibules, cameras, fencing and barriers, metal or weapon detection, any of those, would that go through this process, or what would be the process for, adding those types of improvements to all schools rather than school by school?
So it would be evaluated, it would need to be reviewed, it would have to be submitted, and we do have a facilities modification process that can be submitted by a school. Okay, it's reviewed objectively and then determined if it's ultimately approved to proceed. It's absolutely understood that sometimes there are schools that may have an opportunity to do an upgrade, but I think it's important to note that, very fortunate to have the relationship that we do with the county. They provide the school district with great funding. However, we have to remember that the needs of the district are outpace the dollars. Okay, and it does not mean that due attention is not being provided, because it is, but it has to be reviewed and determined if it's something that can be approved at that time.
So something that would be district-wide, you're talking 200 schools about. So it would either have to come from new funding from the state or from the county?
Potentially, but again, it would need to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this point, members, you've heard from Douglas, you've seen the materials. Are there additional questions anybody has related to prioritization and how we select the schools for renovation and replacement?
I have some, so I didn't know if we all had them, if we should choose an order.
I'll just go around. Ms. Caulfield, do you have any? Okay, Ms. Evans?
Thank you. So really some clarifying questions. The third-party consultant, do they do that exact same rubric? Because the way that I read this is that's a rubric that you all use with the
Correct.
scoring, et cetera.
Yes.
So your team does it, and then the third-party consultant also uses it, or they do their own thing?
Separate process.
And so then you try to see if you're aligned with, or is that how that?
So they're going out there objectively, they're reviewing those buildings and those campuses in the field. They reported back in detail to maintenance and operations. Maintenance and operations is able to take that data and ultimately put that into a formula to determine, excuse me, what the FCI score and the health and safety score would be.
Okay. And then, well, with the, so something like roofs and an HVAC could fall under renovations or life cycle?
It would
Is that-
certainly more likely be a life cycle item. It would not be a standalone for a major renovation likely, because it wouldn't be enough to be considered a
Okay.
major renovation.
That was confusing, just because you noted, under renovations, I thought I
Okay.
heard you note that it would be part of a building such as a roof or an HVAC system.
Right. So in a major renovation, in many cases, those are some of the items that are included in the scope. But if it's a smaller,
Gotcha.
you know what I mean?
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, Ms. Evans? If not, Dr. Ain?
Hi.
Hi, Dr.
Thank you so much for the information. I'm sorry that I missed the last meeting, but I certainly want to have some of the information that you had mentioned about that, the specific schools that are on the list. I would really love to get that information.
Sure.
And in terms of, you're talking about priority list, what's the way to potentially reassess that priority, given changing situations, the changing conditions of a school? You know, you can't just have a one-time assessment and say, this is going to be our priority for the, for a certain period of time. And so how do you go about looking at these priorities, and if there's a way to move a school up, move a school down, so forth?
So I think thank you for your question. I think the most honest and accurate way to answer that is that there's always an opportunity to have a discussion, okay? We would need to understand the reasons why the school, the persons, whomever the submitter might be, they feel like their school meets a more urgent need than how it was assessed and scored. as you can appreciate, the data is critical to keep this an objective process, right? It's not to say that that's the only way to approach it. And as I noted earlier, there are some other factors that are considered that are more subjective in nature. But it would need to be on a case-by-case basis. And when you hire a third-party consultant who's not district staff, they're coming in this with an objective approach to go out there in the field and assess what they're seeing on that campus and in those buildings. If a school feels like there is a greater need perhaps than what was considered by that third party, there is a facilities modification process where there are ways, there's a vehicle for them to submit requests for items in that school that they feel like are in need of attention if it feels like it needs to be more urgent than the life cycle process.
Dr. Ng?
And who goes about petitioning this process?
When you say petitioning, you mean the school themselves?
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. I mean, it has to start at the school level.
Okay, would it be, I mean, the principal or?
Yeah. It would be the principal, and certainly there'd be collaboration with the area superintendent.
Okay. And when it comes, I mean, I appreciate the fact that, you know, health and safety is one of the top priorities, and I do have concerns about, you know, the health and safety of our kids in schools where there may be conditions where it, you know, if it's for a prolonged period of time, under certain conditions, that their health may be affected.
Sure.
And so, you know, it's something that, I mean, that has to be weighed in, and I don't know if in the process of this prioritization, weighing in from a third-party expert, are there any health experts involved in this assessment?
You know, I think a health expert, thank you for the question, that could certainly mean a lot of different things.
So you're
Yeah.
being joined by,
Can I phone a friend?
there you go.
Hi, I'm Nate Slavic. I'm the Senior Director for Maintenance and Operations. So when it comes to the health and safety portion of this rubric, it really comes down to implementing our institutional knowledge of the buildings. So we have staff members that are familiar with our asbestos cataloging process, our lead-based paint process, and then all of our responsive indoor air quality work orders. And this is our opportunity to take that institutional knowledge and we kind of scale it so that we can have that input into what goes into the building. Obviously, the FCI is a factual, let's look at it, look at the construction, but it doesn't tell you necessarily about how it's functioning and what our experiences are with the building in its current condition. So that's what we use the health and safety aspect to try and feed that into the rubric, because obviously, you know, we feel from a maintenance perspective, you know, this function is about getting proper buildings and prioritizing the replacement or renovation of those so that we can keep our schools as equal as possible, but to take out the ones that really need the most work first.
Go ahead.
And there was a mention about OSHA, and I'm very well aware of OSHA, being that I'm, you know, in the health field. What measures are we taking to make sure that we are complying with OSHA standards in our schools? Not just a policy, but in terms of a actual, you know, working knowledge protocol that people would have to comply with in terms of making sure that the kids are safe and healthy.
OSHA falls under a couple of different departments here at the school system. Obviously, risk assessment plays a big role in our OSHA compliance. From maintenance perspective, a lot of our stuff has to do with our workers. But our environmental department is really our kind of is how we get into that pool a little bit in terms of, like I said, it's mostly IAQ, it's mostly building conditions, so that we're meeting regulations per the state.
Okay, thank you.
So I understand, there's standards, and I certainly understand when it comes to standards, but a lot of times the standards are the minimum, and it may not be satisfactory to our parents, to our, the students and the teachers that have to be in it. And so, it's probably something that we need to have a conversation on in terms of complying with standards and exceeding the standards that we are expected to be compliant with, right?
If I could offer an observation. Go ahead and finish, sorry.
So yeah, I know I'm going off topic, but certainly, if capital improvement projects are limited because of funding and sources and whatnot, we need to find other opportunities to make our schools better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Haffey?
Yeah, I just want to say, I've been at this for a while, and certainly this is something with almost, or about, how many buildings are you in charge of now, Nate? 200 or so?
Around 200, yes.
And so there are always issues that come forward. I will say our M&O staff has been responsive in looking at things, making sure that things are up to a standard, and then going back, even when the same problem may arise, going back and double checking, because things will have changed. And so I just want to say that there is a responsiveness from staff. And we talked about, or we kind of talked about PRIMP and SNAP projects that are available, not in the prioritization where certain things can go, as well as life cycle projects. And I'm sure those will come up in another facilities 101. But I just want to say from my own perspective, having been on this board for, 7 years now, I think there are several times that they've been called out to different schools in my district and other districts in order to address different problems and get to different parts.
Can you spell out those acronyms that you just said?
PRIMP is partial renovation, and PR,
Improvement.
an improvement process, and SNAP is,
Space.
come on, space assessment.
Space needs assessment.
See, it's a team effort. It's a team effort.
All right, because Mr. Hershey has embarrassed the chair, we'll go to Ms. Caulfield for her
It's-
question.
Look, man, I'm still working on that dictionary.
So I had two questions. You spoke about a formula. Is there a way that we can see how that unfolds and like what that looks like? Just like as an example, just to understand.
The specific formula, or are you
Yeah,
just talking about the whole rubric?
Well, he said that there was like a formula and how you break down those 4 different priorities.
Yeah, I think it comes down, I think we give, everything is on a kind of a 1 to 5 scale, and then we weight each different one as it shows in the presentation. That's really the only way to kind of,
Okay. So
Make
it's
the
really
math
just more
work
like
out
a
in the end.
weighing, like
It's a
something that has asbestos versus something that needs a repair would kind of move up a little bit.
so when you get into the different categories such as health and safety, there are subcategories to that which are also weighted. And there's various reasons for that. But, and it shows it in the slide, asbestos is 10% of the score, ADA is 10% of the score. And that's kind of how we build that part of the rubric with that department. And then we take, the FCI scores, and then we rank them, and that goes into a 1 to 5 score. And then we can give the appropriate weight to each category to come out with a score in the end.
Okay. And then my other question is, you had mentioned that you have meetings and then you meet several times and then it eventually turns to once a month. How many times does the third party, do they go out and evaluate and give you feedback?
So that was a one-time effort in preparation for building this rubric. We have in-house staff that also does an evaluation, but we thought it was prudent to look at some of our oldest facilities and get a continuous set of eyes on all of them from a professional service, so that, you know, our staff has their own expertise, but, you know, we brought in multiple firms that do this as their business, and we thought that was a good way to get an unbiased eye on all of these facilities, to look at them just for what they are.
So more of like an evaluation tool and a starting point. And then we'll
Correct.
take it from there.
Yeah, I think if we did all 200, we'd be doing all 200 again, as we alluded to over here, every so often. So I think the idea was to get the oldest ones, bite off a chunk of these that we figured was manageable, and start this process, and then see how it goes from there.
And so one of the things that I can add is when we went through this process the first time, we had a lot of great examples that staff was able to give us of, say, here's different schools in different conditions, and how the conditions of those schools would appear in that formula, and then how they would move up and down in those ranks. A little bit of detective work that was at our meeting March 9th, 2022. And so if you want to go back and look at that presentation, and that's something that if there's interest, we could either set up a meeting or review it further. I'm sorry, I said March. Oh, the second one, all right. I've been informed there was a follow-up on April 13th of 2022. So over 2 meetings. I think one of them, we went through the process blind, where it was, here's the data, and they were real schools, but we didn't know which schools they were. How would you arrange these schools, not knowing which schools they were, but just with these conditions? And everybody came and evaluated them. And then after that, we went in and then we saw which schools they were, to try to take out that bias of, oh, this is my school or district in mine, and sort of, you know, make it as objective as we could. So I'd recommend those to you, and if that's something that you have interest in, we can look at that again at a future meeting. Okay? Sam, any final thoughts on this topic? And if not, we'll move on.
Couple, I'm going to follow up a little bit on where Cheryl was going. I'm sorry, Ms. Caulfield. I can't help it. Thank you, Cheryl. Who sets LEG standards?
The district itself meets internally, they're reviewed, and then certainly if something is recommended to change, it's brought to the board for approval.
Okay, so you guys create the standard and then, okay.
And it's based on the state school standards.
That's okay. That's what I was getting clarity on. First of all, I want to say I really appreciate the equation. Well done. I love following the data. Really commend you guys on the work. How long did you guys mess with the formula? Just I'm curious, because I love these types of things, so
It
it's
was
like,
months. I mean,
yeah.
It was a series of meetings, reviews, dialogues, right?
just kind of start putting data in and then tweaking it to see what kind of was
Kinda see
ranked
where
where.
it comes out and what the results
I
are.
think we built off a previous model to include items like the educational adequacy, and to bring in some more of the academics on top of just the condition of the buildings. There was some interest in doing that, and so I think we carved out some of the percentages so that it is mainly a building program, but we're also considering those other inputs.
Got it. Does, I got a few, and then I'll get to you. Does equity kind of weigh into this in any kind of way? I know we have an equity policy now, and it's hard to, when you're following data, and I think you're really it kind of gets baked in regardless, because you want to bring all schools up. But I didn't know if there was any conscious discussion about that.
It's an active part of the conversation. It's
Yeah.
always considered and discussed.
I think from my perspective, that's why the enrollment piece, that 15% was put in there, because you want to look not just at the building, but we know that sometimes the condition of the building can impact market share.
Right.
And if you look at, market share throughout the district, you can see a pretty clear line in different parts of the county.
Yeah.
So making sure that, as well as making sure that our magnet programs are healthy, was why that was given that weight, if I remember correctly.
From a building standpoint, we had the assessors reference our legs and our guidelines, because I believe it's important for us to build back or renovate back to the same standard that we're building now.
Right.
So it's not just a function of, can we make this building work, but can we make it somewhat equitable? And I think it's part of the equation.
That's excellent. I appreciate that very much. A couple of things, and I think this is where Cheryl was going. So like the ADA, and it says 10% scored based on estimated cost of improvements. Can you kind of, is it weighted higher if it costs less, or kind of dig into a little bit on that?
It's, it's a little bit convoluted. I think our staff really judges our buildings based on their ADA compliance. Douglas mentioned that it went into federal law in 1992. So we evaluate our building hey, it was built before 1991. So now we have to see, does it have real ADA compliance issues? And again, that helps influence our score to move it ever so slightly up the list as we go.
Right, but if it's a more expensive ADA, to bring it into ADA compliance, or for the asbestos, is that increase? I'm just kind of working out through the formula.
So the more extensive the issue, the higher the score would be.
That's what I was getting at, okay.
Correct. Yes.
And can you explain for the indoor air quality, based on work orders received, what does that mean?
So indoor air quality is kind of it encompasses a lot of things. But there's obviously information from our environmental team. So if there are environmental issues having to do with indoor air quality at that school, if the system isn't made to dehumidify, they could have mold issues in high humidity times. So there's a bunch of work orders and a bunch of just staff knowledge that goes into, okay, we have a lot of system issues, like we don't dehumidify, or we have minimum outdoor air, things like that can just contribute to poor indoor air quality at schools. And like I said, that's really the staff's opportunity to have input, say these systems don't work well, or we have a lot of environmental issues.
And when, I'm just thinking, so what would be something that would equate to the highest score possible for indoor air quality versus you receive a work order and maybe we can wait on that, or it's a lower priority? Let me phrase it like that, as just examples.
Yeah, I think if it's an annual issue, if it's every year we have to clean up a certain wing of the building or a certain area of the building, or we have to run that area of the building differently to avoid situations like that, that really is kind of towards the top of our list. That means it's not, it definitely doesn't function like other areas of the district.
Right.
It obviously impacts, even if it's just the teachers, because it's like a summertime issue when they're not there. But there's also a maintenance aspect to it. We have to prep it every year. We have to run through finishes or that sort of thing. That kind of goes towards the top of our list. That's just off the top of my head.
No,
And
that's
so,
great.
and
That's
and
great.
so just, there's a lot of issues that we can roll in, and so now we're talking about like work orders. And that might be a topic that we want to bring up at a future meeting too, to sort of let everyone get a good understanding of how the work order process goes,
Yeah, I believe
how
we
that
have
work is scheduled.
I believe we'll be doing a Maintenance 101 presentation here in the coming Facilities Committee meetings.
Great, and I appreciate the blind data that you guys got. I'm looking forward to that, to checking that out, and happy to do that again at some future point. Just appreciate the formula, the thought process going into it, everything you guys are weighing. It's a ton, and just want to reiterate, if we had all the money in the world, it'd take 3 years to have all the schools on the same level, but that is unfortunately not the case.
If we had all the money in the world, it would take 2 to 3 years just to do the design part, man. Go back to your notes.
Well, I mean, are we asking about why it takes?
No, that's a
Yeah,
future
'cause-
meeting.
okay,
I need final
I
thoughts if
was
we're going to get
waiting
through the
on- I
rest
was
of the
gonna
agenda.
wait on that one, thanks.
All right, good questions, though, very good questions. Any final thoughts for Mr. Slavic or for Mr. Condon? All right, go ahead.
Just real quick, what is the scale? When we're talking about the scale and score, like what would be the lowest, what would be the highest?
So I think for the rubric, we do have decimal places in there. But I think, like I said, the idea was really just to keep consistency across. You can go 1 to 10, you could go 1 to 100. I think we just fell on 1 to 5 with some intermediate scoring also.
Okay. And this one, I don't know, might be for another meeting. You can let me
Okay.
know when we can move on. What would be the process if you reach, say, a number 5? I'm assuming 5 is the highest in need, right?
Yeah, I mean, 5 is what we feel is the highest score.
So say you found a school that was maybe not on that list, but it has now become something that could have potentially put it at a number 5.
Yeah.
For example,
Well,
just throwing random out there.
Yeah, let me clarify something that came up earlier. When we speak about our life cycle projects, aside from this list, we're still tracking individual needs at individual schools for their life cycle. So if a roof is 25-plus years old, it's still on our list to replace that roof.
Okay.
If we have systems that are failing, or we're investing a ridiculous amount of maintenance money into every year, on top of the fact that it is old and it is on that list, that's kind of a separate thing. We're going to do that at those facilities regardless of kind of where they are here. We don't want to waste money, but as you know, some of these facilities are 7 years out, and we need to be able to use them during that time. From a maintenance perspective, we have to keep the kids dry, heated and cooled, and in the buildings for learning. So if we have to do smaller projects or we have to do a wholesale replacement, we're going to get that done, and then that might play into what happens next.
So that was going to be part of my question, to try and understand the process.
Yeah.
Is like, say, for example, I'll just throw one out in my school district, Wake Forest Elementary, and it has 2 buildings on the property. And if they do decide, because they're at like 93 and 100 years old, there's a whole bunch of things going on. If they do decide to put that in there, what happens to those children while they're taking, it's an elementary school, so I guess they would probably be on the 16-month, time mark?
Yeah.
Like, what do they do with those children in that meantime of trying to use the land we own?
Right. I mean, it's all school-specific and site-specific, right? So, for example, we had a replacement, a major renovation at York Elementary and at Stowe Elementary. And at both of those, they moved the kids off-site to a new school site that became Barton Pond Elementary. But after the school had been built, it housed the Stowe kids while their renovation and replacement was going on. It housed the York kids while their replacement and renovation was going on. So for a full year, those kids were in the new school building where their school was being renovated. Then they moved back to a shiny new, brand new school on the same site. But then we had some additional work, I think it was at Brassfield, where it didn't require a whole year, but for, I think, 2 quarters, they had moved out, let staff come in, do the renovation. It wasn't like a whole replacement, but do the work that needed to be done, and then move them back in. So when we talk about flex space around the county, that's one of the key needs, because whether it's where we put kids while a new school is being built, but more importantly, where we put kids where a school is being renovated, we have to have adequate spaces for those renovations to take place.
I'm
Yeah.
checking to see, I think we did like a swing space 101.
Mhm.
But, we do
Yeah.
have 2 existing swing space campuses at Spring Forest Road and at the former 9th grade center in Garner. But certainly, I'm doing my digging to see when we talked about it, and I'll share that with you guys.
Yeah. But all good questions, and you see how it all relates, right? So when we look at land purchases, is the land suitable for a school? If not a school, could it be a flex space for renovations at nearby schools? So a lot of options. All right, I'm going to make an executive decision to close this one out and move on, just because we still have our school membership forecast that I know some people are waiting for, and our school capping recommendations to get to. So thank you, Mr. Condon. Thank you, Mr. Slavic. Next, we will welcome Ms. Marcella Rory, who is coming in, who is joined by Michelle, is it Vendito, from the Wake County government, and we'll talk about our student membership forecast and what basically, the process for developing the forecast, what the forecast says, and its impact. I'll give you a second to get set up, and then begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you. We're waiting for the slide deck to come up. And actually, I can go ahead and start talking while it's up there now. Thank you, Ms. Parker. Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us some time to share the student membership forecast. As Mr. Haggerty just did a brief introduction, I also have with me Ms. Michelle Vendito, who is our Wake County Government Budget and Management Services Director. Other forecast team members who would typically be available virtually are Mr. Nathan Dollar and Mr. Christopher Dick with UNC Carolina Demography, Ms. Sandra Honeycutt, who is our WCPSS Director of Student Information Systems, Ms. Sharon Peterson, our Wake County Government Long Range Planning Administrator, Mr. Aaron Brown, our Wake County Government Senior Budget and Management Analyst, and numerous WCPSS and Wake County staff members who support this effort. We are grateful for all of their hard work and support. Prior to the beginning of the presentation, we want to remind existing or former former board members and new board members that the last several years we've introduced the idea of significantly fewer school-aged children in the coming years, regardless of where they choose to attend school. That theme is repeated this year as we note a slower birth rate than years past, but also a steady birth rate increase in Wake County in future years. We also want to reiterate that the unpredictability of when and where charter schools will open or close continues to make it difficult for the county and the school system and its partners to predict public school growth. We want to take a moment to highlight who is involved in creating the projections and what they are responsible for with this effort. Data is collected from WCPSS, Wake County planners, municipal planning agencies, and Carolina Demography, UNC Chapel Hill, to develop forecast data. On this team, the school district is primarily responsible for providing student membership counts and data related to membership trends. Wake County is primarily responsible for providing economic and demographic data and information on trends. This slide provides some detail about how that information is used. The process begins when the school district provides the average daily membership figures at the end of the second month, also referred to as the PMR2 or Principal's Monthly Report Month 2. This information is combined with historic membership data and planning data so that the forecast team can develop new projections. Data is adjusted annually to reflect changes in membership, birth rates, school-age residents, and parental choices. Some of the definitions on this page you will remember from the 2022-23 FIR presentation just a few weeks ago, which is important to remember for the forecast discussion as well. As I shared in the recent FIR presentation, there is a difference between membership, or ADM, and enrollment. ADM, or average daily membership, is subject to attendance violations, whereas enrollment is the total number of students who are enrolled at a school regardless of attendance violations. An enrolled student is not counted in ADM after 10 consecutive unexcused absences, otherwise referred to as an attendance violation or a violation of the 10-day rule. You'll hear those terms interchangeably. When enrolled students return to school, they are once again counted in the ADM. PMR2, or the Principal's Monthly Report, is month 2 of the average daily membership, which is used for the forecast. As our team shared with the board last year, the effects of COVID on student attendance further exacerbated the difference between those two numbers, ADM and our enrollment. However, During any typical year, the enrollment numbers are typically higher than the average daily membership. Later in the presentation, we will go into detail about the projections for the future. But we wanted to share some important background information to offer perspective. The 10-year forecast was made using the following assumptions and parameters. COVID continues to have an impact on student membership and enrollment. Enrollment in alternative schooling options, i.e. homeschool, charter, and private, have continued to be in flux. The Wake County economy remains strong, and live births have mostly remained steady with slight increases and decreases that are projected to impact membership, and we'll expound on that a little bit later. The COVID-19 global pandemic does not have a historical precedent that we could use as a point of reference, making our assumptions about a return to normal or a new normal a key theme. It has caused significant disruptions with a reduction of enrollment, especially at the kindergarten and first grade levels. The birth to kindergarten ratios dropped nearly 0.8 in 2020-21 from historic averages of approximately 0.94, meaning only about 80% of the children born in Wake County in 2015 attended WCPSS in 2020-21. This is due to the fact that during the COVID total school closures, the return to virtual school learning, and the eventual opening of in-person education, families made other market share decisions, leading to an increase in non-public options of approximately 2% of the total student population. While some families have returned to the public school system, leading to increases in the birth to kindergarten ratios over the previous 2 years, others have continued with other choices. During 2021-22, WCPSS saw a modest gain in membership, and in 2022-23, WCPSS saw a slight decrease in membership. As you see in this graph, membership has varied this school year over several large school districts, with some seeing significant increases compared to the prior school year and others seeing significant decreases. Current membership and enrollment levels remain lower than those before the pandemic. Each year, a school district average daily membership is taken from the second month of the school year. This graph gives you an idea of how our numbers compare pre-COVID in 2019-20 to the last 2 years and this year. Attendance violations had a significant impact on our PMR2 for the 2020-21 and the 2021-22 school years. In order to try to provide a more accurate forecast, the team decided to use an adjusted ADM to normalize this number closer to pre-COVID levels for use in the projections. This year, while we have not fully returned to the pre-pandemic attendance violation level, we had a lower number that was closer to the pre-pandemic number, and therefore the team decided not to use an adjusted ADM for the forecast. The WCPSS ADM decreased by 654 students, or approximately 0.41%, in 2022-23 versus the 2021-22 adjusted ADM. Small declines were seen in nearly all grades up to 9th grade, with increases in 10th through 12th grades, as well as 1st and 3rd grades. It is important to note, and you heard me mention this at the presentation a few weeks ago, we must provide seats for every student that's enrolled, not just the students that are covered under the average membership. School choice options have always been a focus for WCPSS. The data here is based on WCPSS charter billing and the data reported for home and private schools from the Division of Non-Public Education at the NC Department of Administration. Wake County charter schools and private schools experienced slight enrollment growth, while home schools experienced a slight decline. Information on the number of students that moved to a home school or private school for the 2022-23 school year will not be known until July 2023. That's the annual reporting time frame, when that data is released from the Division of Non-Public Education, or NCDOA. This data will be factored into future annual projections. Wake County charter school membership grew by 1,147 students, or 7.3% in 2022-23. This is similar to the statewide growth rate in charter membership. For this forecast, the charter school impact on WCPSS membership for the 2023-24 school year is anticipated to be 17,233 students, an increase of 306 students over the October 2022 charter billing number. Wake County charter membership increased most significantly in middle school grades 6 and 7, followed by elementary grades, particularly 1st and 3rd. At the high school level, Wake County charter school membership decreased for all grades except 10th. The charter applications provide projected enrollment numbers, but final numbers are not confirmed until closer to the start of the school year. Between the application process and the school's opening date, schools are permitted to amend their projected enrollment numbers or request delayed openings. And I believe after 2 requests of delayed openings, then you have to start the entire application process over. Charter schools may not open unless they have enrolled at least 75% of their projected year 1 ADM. It is anticipated that no new charters will impact WCPSS in the 2023-24 school year. However, WCPSS is impacted when charter schools close. Approximately 400 students returned to WCPSS as a result of the one charter closure last school year. It is difficult to predict how many charters will actually open based on recent history. The impact of charters continues to be a fluid situation and one that we continuously monitor.
So I'll move on to the next few slides. So the economy is still strong, as Marcella noted, and projecting population growth. Economic indicators in Wake County do remain strong. The unemployment rate has been consistently lower than the state average. Both Wake County and North Carolina's unemployment rates increased significantly in April and May. As of November 2022, Wake County's unemployment rate was 3.1%, which is similar to February, right before the start of the pandemic, when the unemployment rate was 3.2%. Next slide, please. So this chart helps illustrate the importance of the birth rate on long-range forecasts. The orange line shows kindergarten membership in the Wake County Public School system. The blue line shows the number of births 5 years earlier, so you can see the correlation between the two. Between the 2015-16 and 2019-20, the average birth to kindergarten ratio was 0.938. So similar to some comments Marcella shared earlier, that would mean at that time 93% of the births 5 years earlier translated to kindergartners in the WCPSS system. This ratio dropped to 0.81 in 2021, the lowest ratio observed in WCPSS over the past 21 years, and rebounded some. If historical ratios had held in 2023, WCPSS would have expected about 11,800 students, kindergartners. Instead, there were 10,900 enrolled. As kindergarten is not mandatory, parents may still be withholding children from kindergarten or sending them to private or charter schools. Birth rates for years 2008 and prior, which are reflected by the peak seen in 2013-14, increased year over year by as much as 4%. Since then, birth rates either have decreased or increased only moderately. A combination of prior live births and actual kindergarten membership and the projected increase for 2022-23 both impact the grade progression ratios used to forecast grade level membership, which is the approach our consultant uses for our projections, and we assume births will continue to grow, reflecting overall strong population growth in Wake County. So here's our forecast and a comparison of forecasts. And forecasts are that, just forecasts. They are based in part on past behaviors, so when the behavior changes, so does the forecast. For the forecast development for the last 2 years, the team aimed to predict the changes in events spurred by the COVID-19 pandemic, but could not guarantee its effect on birth rates, residential migration patterns, or school choice. The updated forecast reflects both the updated short and long-term impacts of these variables. To orient you to this slide, the black line is the forecast presented 2 years ago with the pandemic inputs. The blue top line is the forecast presented last year with inputs that capture the return to school and slightly increased birth rate impacts. And the yellow middle line is the current forecast. As in previous years, this slide continues to represent shifts made to the forecast. The forecast team annually reviews new data, conducts error analysis, analyzes trends, and adjusts the forecast accordingly. These adjustments are based on data collected and received and made in response to existing and new trends. The WCPSS membership or enrollments are projected to increase slightly in 2023 to just above their 2022 level, 158,412 students for this year to 159,051 for the upcoming projection. A decrease of projected enrollment in 24-25 and 25-26 is caused by a large cohort of students aging out of school and a smaller cohort of kindergartners aging into the schools. The forecast then projects consistent increase in growth driven by projected increasing live births rates in 26-27 through the end of this projection, which is 2032 and 33. The current year projection trend line is slightly lower than last year's projection because of the introduction of the actual results for the current school year, which was fewer students, particularly in kindergarten, which informs the current projection. Over the next 10 years, this forecast would see an addition of approximately 7,000 students.
Predicting growth in, sorry about that. Predicting growth in any given year is challenging, but is even more difficult under these unprecedented circumstances. By viewing the broader context of this forecast, it is worth remembering that the majority of Wake County families choose to attend the Wake County public school system. We are continuing to predict that public schools will continue to enroll the majority of students in Wake County. Therefore, continued investments in school construction, facility improvements, and programmatic classroom enhancements remain vital to attracting over 75% of our families. As the team finalized the forecast, the assumptions that we outlined earlier still leave us with some questions regarding membership and enrollment challenges. How many missing students will return to school? Will families continue to make other school choices during and after the pandemic? How will inflation and decreases in home sales impact school choice decisions? How well will charter applications capture true build-out? In Wake County, similar to the situation statewide, the decrease in public school memberships and enrollments was not fully offset by increased enrollments in other school systems. In any year, there are challenges in making projections, but the past 3 years have been particularly challenging due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is very hard to predict the response coming out of the pandemic, and we may see continued flux well into future school years and beyond. As backup to this presentation, you will find the membership memo, a detailed report of the new forecast that provides data sources and other information, a copy of the 10-year membership projections, and a copy of this presentation. Thank you, and we are happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Rory. And so, committee members, just for context, this is important because, you know, our school growth and our school enrollment determines, you know, where and how we build new facilities. But then also, please remember the distinction between your average daily membership and enrollment. Because when we build our schools, we don't build our classrooms and buy desks based on the average number of kids who might be there. We have to build the capacity for all of the students who are enrolled. But managing these trends understanding these trends helps us manage our growth and plan as wisely as we can. So given that, does anyone have any questions for our presenters? Ms. Edmonds?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you please repeat it was very early in the presentation. I didn't catch which slide you were on, but you talked about the increases, I believe, in the children coming back to us are highest in first and third grade, and then you said ninth and what? Or have I got that? Ninth, 10th, 11th, and, okay, so high school. Oh, okay.
I believe that was slide 7. Our ADM decreased by 654 students in 2022-23 versus 21-22 adjusted ADM. Small declines were seen in nearly all grades up to 9th grade, with increases in 10th through 12th grades, as well as 1st grade and 3rd grade. Is that the slide?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Yes.
2 other things, Chair Haggerty.
Yes. Go ahead.
So you said that no new charters are expected to impact WCPSS for 23-24. Are you including charters that are outside Wake County?
The information that we provide, actually, when you pull up the report, you'll see there's a map on one of the pages that actually shows there are charter schools or students that are living in Wake County, attending charter schools that are outside of Wake County. When we share information about the number of charters that are predicted to open, we're only looking at the number of schools that are predicted to open in Wake County.
Okay.
Because if we look at the ones that are outside, there's no way for us to kind of judge or predict or forecast how many of our students are willing to travel that far to go to school.
That is exactly why I asked the question, just to make sure for us as well as the public that that's what you mean when you make that statement. And then the last thing I have is just a comment that for, again, us and the public, it's important to recognize that at least with private school, the expansion of private school vouchers has not just happened as far as the tuition amount that families have access to, but eligibility has expanded in every recent state budget. So now I believe a family that has an income of something like $85,000 a year, $85,000 a year, is eligible for voucher money, and that is not how they started. But I just think that's very important for context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Mr. Hershey?
To follow Lynn's question about charter schools just outside, at some point, won't we have data on saying, being able to identify trends of, 6% are going to a charter school within 3 miles of the Wake County border? Is that not, I mean, it's one thing, we're not going to project 45 miles away, but the ones that are right over the border, is that possible to begin to project?
I will say that's not a discussion that the forecast team has had, but it's certainly something that we can review. Our GIS team actually produced the map that you see in that report, and I believe it's on page 6. And so we actually know how many students are currently doing that. So there is a way to do it. We just simply have not had that discussion as part of the forecast team at this point.
I would encourage that just because I assume charter schools are going to intentionally open in places just outside of Wake County. The other question I had, and you mentioned that it was, and it may have, you were talking about charter schools closing, and then you said it was hard to predict charter school, when a new charter school is opening, and I didn't know if you meant to predict when they actually close, if there's any way to predict that based on the recent history of how many stay open and how many close?
Actually, they're both difficult to predict, because one of the things I shared is that you're not allowed to open until you've met the 75% of your ADM, but you're allowed to keep changing your opening date at least up to 2 times before having to start the process over. Then you're allowed to continue changing what that ADM is. So it makes it a little bit challenging for us to figure out, okay, is the school actually going to be able to open? There are several that we discovered when we went through this process last year. They were already recruiting, but they didn't even have a building yet. So it puts us in a little bit of an interesting situation to say, okay, we think they're going to open, but then they don't. Also, I'm sure you've been following the news lately and looking at it. One charter may get the first level of approval, but then they may not get the second level of approval, but then there's a final decision the following February. So we do work closely with DPI, Department of Public Instruction, because they're the folks that are actually monitoring that whole application process and who got approved and providing us updates on that information. But we can forecast these are the ones that are supposed to open at this point in time, and this is the number of kids, but the fact that those things can continuously change makes it challenging.
Yeah, the last point, it's a great presentation. I was looking at slide 12, and I would encourage like much larger numbers or bold numbers for the percentage, for the attendance, because it looks like it's a huge number when the graph shoots up.
Got it.
And it's really hard. I mean, I can read it, but if someone's not really paying attention, it could be deceiving. But it's a great presentation, and I do not envy having to make these predictions.
And thank you so very much for the questions and for the comments. And just so that you know, we battled about that slide last year, and we battled about it again this year. So whenever we made the numbers larger, the difference from each tick point, I mean, it looked like it was barely, I mean, you couldn't tell a difference one way or the other. So when we made the gap a little bit smaller, it looks like a huge swoop, but like you said, that's a fair point.
152 really big, and 168 really big. Excellent work.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hershey. Dr. Ng, you had a question?
Yes, I agree. It was very informative presentation. I just, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but when you're looking at the fluctuations in enrollment over the past few years, and COVID really kind of threw everyone for a loop in more ways than one, and some of the things that talking about, when students move from school to school, are they moving? What is the reason they're moving? Are they moving to against something or away from a school for a certain reason. And I think that there are good things to kind of try to capture, some information they try to capture in somehow, in terms of why people move. Kind of unofficial, is that I understand that people go to private schools or charter schools, and then at the high school level they end up going to public school because public schools have so much more to offer. And so those are things that you can certainly try to capture and, actually use that as a PR kind of thing to make a case for public schools. And so certainly, the families still, have their right to make a choice about where they want to go, their kids to go. But if we have the ability to make ourselves more competitive, I think that would certainly be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. And that is something, when we talk about school choice and some of our strategies, that's something that will come up with some of our staff. I thought it was really interesting in the presentation, the difference from county to county, right? Because there was no clear pattern. It wasn't that urban counties were losing and rural counties were growing or vice versa, right? It wasn't that, counties that looked like high growth, because, Franklin County is experiencing a lot of growth, yet you saw that number go down, but then you saw Harnett County, similar county, with that growth trend going the other way. So it would be really great to kind of go in and do a deeper dive into some of those numbers and some of those factors. Okay. Go ahead. Thanks, Ms. Caulfield. Sorry. I do want us to get to our next presentation on capping, because I know that's a complex one as well.
So mine all might go together in the same answer. So how about I just list my questions for the sake of time, and then you tell me if this doesn't kind of give you a roundabout to come in the answer. So you had mentioned, or one of the slides had said, the kindergarten, it's not so much about how many kindergartners we have eligible, it is who has enrolled. Is that correct? When you were speaking about the enrollment and that it was, that our kindergarten enrollment was down for a period of time, that's not because of the amount of eligible students, it's how many have enrolled in Wake County already, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So then, as far as, I know we had spoken about like students who were missing students not accountable for. And this might all tie together with what Dr. Ng said about how, did they move away, or, are they moving from the school district for a certain reason or coming back for a certain reason? To track that with the students, do they have like a certain way to evaluate all that data to see? Because obviously we want to see all of that continue to grow, but we need to pay attention to what are the reasons why. And I know that there's a lot of information in here about COVID and those numbers pre-COVID and after, but we're also growing in leaps and bounds. So I think that does need to be taken into consideration. I know like in Wake Forest, I mean, they're just slapping apartment buildings everywhere. So eventually they're going to be filled when they're done being built, and that's going to bring a lot more people into our community. But also in Wake Forest, we also have a lot of charters around us. And on to what Mr. Hershey was saying, like Wake Prep, for example. Just Sam. Along with what just Sam was saying. They built Wake Prep, but surrounding Wake Prep on 3 sides is Wake Forest. But I believe that it is actually in the next town. So it kind of is all of our community that's going there. So is there a way to basically put all of that together, because the prediction, and it does, this slide, I had to put my glasses on and look at it because it looks like, woo, we're going to take off. Is there a way to put all that data together? Because I think it does matter. If they're in county, why they're leaving, is kindergarten enrolling somewhere else and they're just not going there? Because if you have somebody in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade or high school and they have younger siblings, they might not be enrolling that kindergartner because they've already moved on to, charter or something else. So we need to know why they left so we know how to bring them back.
Do you have a response, Ms. Roy? Or?
My response would be that detailing that information is outside of the scope of the actual forecast team. However, I do know that WCPSS, whenever we have students that leave the district, there is a survey that's done asking very pointed questions. Why are you making a different choice? Is there something else that would bring you back? So there is a process for gathering that type of data to help us to try to get some of that market share back. If there are specific concerns or issues that we could immediately address that may impact this particular family or those numbers of families. But it is outside of the scope of the forecast team's thing.
Okay. And then finally, Ms. Mahaffey, if you want to close us out.
I just had a quick question, only because Ms. Veneto is here, and I appreciate the partnership that the county has with the district in making these predictions. One of the things that always struck me is hearing not just, about the residents that are coming via, Wake Med or what have you, but how many people are moving into Wake County on a daily basis? I know it used to be like in the 60s, and where are we seeing those trends of where people are moving to? And if you don't know, you can get back to me. Yes. Okay. I always, yes, I always find that striking, just because it's not just looking at people that are giving birth and residents that are coming, but, people like myself that have moved to Wake County and chosen to make this home. So.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you, Chair Mahaffey. All right, thank you, Ms. Vendetta. Thank you, Ms. Rory. We really appreciate it. A lot of information, a lot of documents to pour through with the reports and everything else, so thank you very much. All right, our next item on the agenda is, I think, anticipated by many, Mr. Glenn Carrozza. Let's see, Ms. Rory will be staying with us. Is Ms. Ellis here? Is she joining us or no? Okay, so this is on our school capping recommendations. So if everyone has a chance to pull up that presentation. Ms. Rory, are you driving this one as well? All right.
I am.
Well, if everyone is ready, Ms. Rory, feel free to begin when you are ready.
Excellent. Thank you for allowing us some time to bring the 2022-23 capping recommendations. As you just mentioned, we do have Mr. Carrozza, Assistant Superintendent of School Choice Planning and Assignment, and we also have Ms. Susan Pulliam, who's the Senior Director of Student Assignment, and also Chief Ellis, who is the Chief of all things schools and other schools, yes. So thank you all very much. Enrollment caps are addressed in Policy Code 4150, Section B. The recommendations for school capping would begin immediately following the approval at the February 21st board meeting and would continue through the 2023-24 school year. The capping process includes input from individual schools' principals, the Office of Student Assignment, Transportation, and long-range planning. Please note, enrollment caps do not affect current students of a school. When a school has an enrollment cap, it means that students who move into the based attendance area after the date the cap is imposed, they may have to attend a designated overflow school. Staff generally brings capping recommendations to the board annually following the finalization of the enrollment plan. As our school choice team continues to monitor school enrollments during the school year, we will bring any necessary updates or recommendations to the facilities committee should we need to alert the board to an individual school's concern. When making capping recommendations, we look at the crowding in the brick and mortar building as well as the crowding in the capacity trailers on the site. Schools that are recommended for capping are above a certain percentage campus crowding number without proximate relief with either new construction or renovations that would provide an increase in capacity. An overflow school must be identified for each capped school that can enroll the students who are capped out of the capped school. Crowded schools are schools that are above a certain percentage crowding, but may have upcoming proximate capacity relief. Those change the utilization of space. Those crowded schools change the utilization of existing spaces to accommodate the crowding on a temporary basis. It is important to note that some capped schools may not have proximate relief with either new construction or renovations that will provide increased capacity, or a proximate overflow option. When evaluating options for dealing with crowding, our goal is to make recommendations that will allow for longer-term stability for the community, consider transportation challenges, and provide the best educational environment for our students. There are several tools that we use to help manage and reduce area crowding. We increase available district capacity by constructing new schools, adding capacity during renovations of existing schools where possible, adding trailers where possible. We provide magnet schools and encourage consideration of magnet school choices. Our magnet schools not only help reduce high concentrations of poverty, but they also promote diversity and school integration, provide innovative and/or expanded educational opportunities, and they also help maximize the use of our school facilities. We make recommendations that adjust the student assignment areas to help reduce crowding in overcrowded schools and increase utilization in under-enrolled schools. After evaluating proximate schools to determine if there is available capacity, we make recommendations for enrollment caps in overflow schools. Capping is a temporary measure. I usually smile when I say that. Capping is a temporary measure that gives us time to implement the other tools. Capping should be considered short-term because it is not a solution. Crowding is fluid, neighborhoods age out, and growth patterns change. When an area's growth is expected to continue increasing, changing a school's calendar from traditional to multi-track year-round would also allow us to realize additional capacity. It is important to note that the capping process must consider current conditions, future capacity relief, transportation limitations, and provide a runway for addressing the needs of our families. Many factors are considered prior to making a capping recommendation. We ensure that a school is meeting legislative requirements. We look at whether a school is implementing a new program or anticipating relief due to the opening of a new school or a renovated school. We evaluate how a school's core areas are able to support their population for dining, media center, etc. We evaluate if a school has exhausted all appropriate means of accommodating their classes without sacrificing the learning environment. We evaluate if a school's site to determine whether or not we can place trailers on a campus. If a campus has exceeded the trailer limit for that school level, and if more trailers could be accommodated. Per our CIP, our Capital Improvement Planning Program, planning assumptions, our goal is to limit the number of trailers at an elementary school to 4, middle school and high school to 6. Meeting this goal has not always been possible during our years of extreme growth. It is important to remember that it takes a minimum of a year from the time you request a trailer to the time that it is moved to a campus and ready to be occupied. We have maintained a line item in the 7-year CIP plan to accommodate trailer moves, but due to increased cost and time for installation and occupancy, Installing trailers cannot be viewed as a means to address immediate crowding. We also look at the impact of base students' growth increases, since those students would also be enrolled at those crowded schools. As part of our annual forecast update process, we meet with the planners for each municipality. They share data that includes the projected short-term and long-term residential development, including when they expect those developments to be occupied. When we know that a new residential development is coming in the vicinity of a school, we know that these new homes have the potential to impact those proximate schools. When schools have already converted significant numbers of classrooms from non-capacity to capacity spaces, it limits the options for accommodating the student population growth. At the elementary level, there is less flexibility for assigning classroom space changes. For example, K-1 classrooms must be on the first floor. If a school has K-1 classes in trailers, our goal is to move those classes inside the building. If the school already has multiple classrooms where co-teaching or combined grades is occurring, our goal is to try to reduce the school's enrollment so that each class has an independent teaching space. For middle and high schools, our capacity models allow for 26 students per general classroom. This is typically not possible, and we average 33 students per classroom. Schools have some flexibility to make changes in teaching space assignments to accommodate student growth. Elementary schools have limited flexibility due to the legislative class size requirements for grades K through 3. There is a waiver process to accommodate schools who need to exceed the per classroom limits at +3, but school and district averages must be maintained. Although there is no state mandate for 4th and 5th grade class sizes, our goal is to accommodate between 24 to 26 students in each. This is the list of schools that were capped for the 2022-23 school year. Since 2018-19, we have averaged 15 to 18 capped elementary schools, 1 to 2 capped middle schools, and 2 to 3 capped high schools. This map identifies the capped elementary schools with their attendance areas in red. This is a good reminder that the most concentrated area of capped elementary schools is in the Western Wake planning area, where strong residential growth has been sustained for a number of years. There are a few exceptions as shown in other high-growth areas. This map identifies the capped middle schools with their attendance areas in red. The 2 capped middle schools are also concentrated in the Western Wake planning area, where there is sustained strong residential growth. This map identifies the capped high schools with their attendance areas in red. 2 capped high schools are concentrated in the Western Wake planning area, and 1 capped high school is in the Northeast Wake planning area. After these reviews, we are bringing to you the following recommendations. Based on our crowding data, staff is recommending that the cap be removed from Sycamore Creek Elementary School. Sycamore Creek Elementary has seen relief with the opening of new schools and renovations that have increased proximate capacity and allowed their crowding number to reduce. We are recommending that we remove the dual overflow at Apex Elementary and Olive Chapel Elementary, which reduces the potential strain on transportation. We are recommending that we keep Penny Road Elementary as the overflow for Apex Elementary, and remove Balcom Elementary at Woods Creek Elementary. We are recommending that we keep Turner Creek Elementary as the overflow for Olive Chapel Road Elementary and remove Salem Elementary. We are also recommending that one new cap be implemented this year. The residential growth in the Apex Friendship area has continued, and Apex Friendship Elementary has already reached a significant level of crowding in its first year of operation. Apex Friendship Elementary cannot support increased enrollment and keep classes in the independent program teaching spaces, and the site cannot accommodate trailers. They are already utilizing co-teaching options in some classrooms. They are working with long-range planning on placement of other classes within the building. As we work through the capping factors and considerations with the principals, transportation, and the Office of Student Assignment, we are recommending that Apex Friendship Elementary be capped. As part of the capping recommendation process, we also recommend overflow schools to enroll the additional students. Similar to the considerations and factors that are evaluated for capping recommendations, we consider those same factors for the overflow schools. We also must consider transportation needs and bell schedules as part of the process for both the capped and the overflow schools. We are recommending that Apex Friendship Elementary overflow to Balcom Elementary at Woods Creek Elementary School. And just as a refresher, they will be swinging into that school while their existing renovation, new construction project is completed. It is important to reiterate that we only open new elementary schools reflecting an 80% capacity. Apex Friendship Elementary at full capacity of 716 students would have still been at 105.2% on the same, using the same PMR2 data for this first year in operation. Our transportation team works to ensure that the bus runs are as tight as possible to reduce the time that students are on buses and reduce cost. There is typically more flexibility in the mornings because you can move the start times up, but there is little to no flexibility with a second and third tier route. During a standard school year, bus ridership changes due to other factors, including parent choice. We estimate that approximately 3 additional buses will be needed to accommodate the new proposed school cap at a cost of $50,000 per bus. Prior to the pandemic, we supported a total of 756 buses on 3 tiers across the county. In any academic year, there are always challenges with hiring enough drivers, and we expect that challenge to continue. In summary, staff recommends removing the cap from 1 school, removal of the dual overflows at 2 schools, and adding 1 new enrollment cap. As our school choice team continues to monitor school enrollments, we will bring forward any updates through the Facilities Committee should we need to alert the board to any individual concerns that may require immediate attention. We plan to bring forward a final capping recommendation approval at the February 21st board meeting. The Office of Student Assignment and Long Range Planning will meet with all capped and overflow schools to review the process. Thank you, and we now open up the floor for questions. And as I mentioned, I do have some additional folks here that can answer questions that I may or may not be able to answer.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Roy. There's a lot in this presentation and a lot of different issues we can unpack here. I have questions, but I'll save mine toward the end just in case we run over with the time we have. Ms. Caulfield, did you have any at this time? All right, Chairman Haffey.
given that this is going to most likely be on an upcoming board meeting, I do have questions about specific schools in the Western Wake area. When I'm looking at the backup document for the capping, I think it would be helpful to see for Apex Friendship Elementary, for example, and adding the cap, something that kind of explicitly calls out, the different factors that we're looking at for that recommendation going into the presentation that we'll have during a board meeting. I also would love to see.
I'm sorry, may I clarify?
Yep.
So on that particular document, you'd like to have the capping recommendations or the things that, the considerations added to that particular document?
No, I'm sorry, I was not clear. On the slide, as we're looking at, for myself, for Apex Friendship Elementary and adding that, not just seeing the crowding with trailers, but seeing the capacity and the capping number explicitly called out, the recommended capping number in the presentation slide. I was starting to ask another question, and then this one popped into my head. My apologies. When I'm looking at the Panther Creek piece, and I look at the overflow school, it says Green Level High School. Given the growth in the Green Level base attendance area, and that currently we have one student that is capped out, and Green Level having a capacity of over 90%, is that something that we plan on being sustainable? I know there's a lot of growth coming to the Panther Creek area as well. I know, and also historically, Green Hope was the cap out piece. I don't know if I need an answer today, but just something that came to mind as I was looking over the documentation. And then of bigger concern is when we're talking about removing Salem as the overflow for Olive Chapel, and Turner Creek being the overflow that's exclusively there. Turner Creek was added as an overflow for Olive Chapel Elementary, but it is also the overflow for Highcroft Drive Elementary School. Bockham is now the overflow that's exclusive to Scotts Ridge. We'll be removing Apex Elementary, but adding Apex Friendship Elementary. That puts a lot of strain on a school and the overflow school principal and their staff on knowing who's coming from where, what the where these kids are coming from. I'm curious, the reason for those being selected as the overflow schools and removing Salem, I believe, entirely as a overflow school for schools in the district.
Thank you for the question. I will start, and then I'm going to invite a couple people to join me up here. I would say one of the things that will be beneficial for Bockham Elementary is that when they move into Woods Creek, starting in the 2023-24 school year, they will immediately see an increase in capacity, as Woods Creek is a larger elementary. When they go back to their existing campus, it is anticipated that not only will they have that same increased capacity at their main campus, but now we have additional seats and availability at Woods Creek. So at future presentations, you will more than likely see some requests for adjustments for some of those, and then I'm going to stop talking and look at Susan Pulliam.
Yes, so specific to the Apex Friendship recommendation, looking at the proximity of the two schools to each other while Bockham is at Woods Creek, and recognizing that there is a portion of the Apex Friendship Elementary base that potentially will be impacted when Woods Creek opens, it seemed a bit of a nice short-term solution that transportation could better manage than another site. In talking about the removal of Salem from the group, we'll get you some specific numbers. There's just not that many students that live in the attendance areas that are being overflowed to Salem. The majority are being overflowed to Turner Creek, and Turner Creek is able to handle that capacity. But we'll get you those numbers to help support why we made that recommendation.
So it allows kids that are already capped out at Turner Creek to stay in that
Correct.
area rather than move them entirely to a different overflow school.
Correct.
Okay,
That's
that
the
makes
stability
perfect
piece
sense.
that hits our overflow families probably a little bit
Right.
differently than others. We'd like for them to maintain their membership at their overflow school versus being shifted to a third school, really, by
Right.
going to a second overflow
No,
school.
that absolutely makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that. I do wonder if we can find a way to state which of the schools, I know there's only 2 of them that have a feeder pattern cap, because I think that is a different way of, I know it impacts Apex Friendship High School and Mills Park Middle, but I think that's something that's just a little bit different compared to the overflow that other folks are doing. And if possible, for a future facilities committee meeting or maybe a work session, talking about, what land bank or future schools that are coming, like in the Holly Springs and Apex area, we have Rex Road, we have Felton Grove High School, we have other elementary schools that are coming, as well as land banks at the Woods Creek site for a future middle school. The continuing concern, and I don't mean to put words in Chair Haggerty's mouth, but is West Cary, because there is, we know we have a middle school coming, we know that we have a high school coming, but that elementary piece is tough, and I hate to sound like a broken record talking about, a 2017 session law that really impacted those areas, but we're still reeling. I guess I'd be curious to know how many of these caps would be lifted if we didn't have to comply with the class size legislation from 2017. And that's more of a rhetorical question that doesn't need to be answered right now, but I think it's important for the community to know that we're still reeling from the impacts of that. And I'll get off my soapbox.
Just to clarify, as we do that analysis, would 24 students per class be an appropriate number to work with?
I'm thinking of what we had prior to the class size law, which I think might have been the 24, and then, we were able to have an aide in every kindergarten classroom as well. Just out of curiosity, I mean, we don't have to parse any additional numbers out.
I second that. I would love to see that.
That's it. That's all I got.
Anything else, Chair Maffey? Any other questions, Dr. Renning?
Thank you so much. Just for the uninitiated and for people watching, what is the process of converting a traditional calendar school to I know this is, to accommodate for more students with multiple tracks and all that?
And Dr. Ing, just because it is 5 o'clock already, we might need to defer that one. That is a huge topic. If staff can
That's
answer the
fair.
question, but we definitely will be getting into more detail about this topic at additional meetings. I do want you to get your answer, though.
That's fair.
The short answer is a lot of public engagement, a lot of outreach, a lot of surveying, a lot of analysis of what the impacts would be to the school in terms of being able to bring students perhaps back from their overflow school. Would it even solve the problem? Type questions, but certainly that is an activity we will most likely be engaging in this spring, and I think Glenn will be bringing that back. But a lot of engagement to make sure that we have a full scope of what the impact would be.
And also, one of the things that we stress as well is that our capital improvement plan, our program assumptions state, we will complete school projects allowing the board to make a decision as to whether or not to assign a school either traditional or multi-track year-round, because usually you're making that decision right before that school opens. I'm going to look at Susan so she won't smack me over here, but I would say is typically a better situation to open it as a multi-track year-round than to try to do a conversion. Because doing that conversion, unless you're going to open it as, say, a single track a single track year-round, and then eventually add on the other tracks. Opening it as traditional and then switching it is a much more challenging endeavor, for lack of a better descriptor.
Well, good to know for future. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hershey, then Ms. Caulfield?
Two questions real quick, one for the chair and vice chair. When we get these presentations, are they available to the, like, these slides, are they available to the public, and where would they find them?
Absolutely, and they're on Assembly. So everything that we get that's uploaded into Assembly is public, with the exception of anything that's done in closed session.
Thank you. What happens if we can't find 3 new bus drivers?
Yeah, that's getting into my question, too.
That is a very good question. And I know we have Mr. Strickland over here. I'm not sure if I see Mr. Schneidmiller over there in that area. And I'm not sure if he's coming to the table
I
or
don't know
not.
that we need a specific answer
Yeah.
to that
Correct. It's
today,
just-
but I
It's a
will say,
challenge.
it is an important point, and I think it's one that we need to discuss when the capping recommendations come to us, either in work session or in the full board, because a lot of the decisions about what to cap, where we cap, if we're making decisions about capping schools, and that's dependent on available transportation, and we can't meet our current transportation obligations, then we have to reevaluate whether capping is an option. And then when we look at all of our choices, capping, reassignment, conversion of schools to multi-track year-round if they were year-round in high-growth areas, whatever those options might be, we have to look at all of those in the context of what we can do and what we can do efficiently. And, you know, right now, I think, and I'm going to editorialize a little bit, I think we relied on capping because it was, you know, the least of several bad options, right? Maybe it wasn't as destabilizing. Maybe it would only affect, you know, fewer people than if you have a major reassignment or you convert a school. But if we're struggling with our transportation needs the way we are now, we really have to look about whether or not we can do this. So I really appreciate that question, and I think it's one we do need to address. I know, Mr. Strickland, you probably don't have an answer for us right now, but just be warned that one's coming up.
No, I do know the impact would be felt likely at the base school from talking with transportation, so.
Okay. And did you have a second question, Sam?
I'm just going to plug careers.wcpss.net for anybody that would like to be a bus driver.
All right.
And if I may just simply reiterate, we didn't want to bring a recommendation for a cap school to you. We understand. I talk with Bob Snodmiller, and Susan meets with him on a regular basis. That's why we go through all those steps to try to accommodate within that building until we get some relief from a Bauckham, or relief from a Woods Creek, or relief from a future Rex Road, or relief from some of the others. So just know, we've exhausted every option for maintaining those students at that building, meeting legislative requirements, and then also looking at what is that environment, because there comes a point where you simply can't put more kids in a room. One of the things that I've noticed as I continue to go out, I've been here over 20-something odd years now, but the kids aren't getting smaller. So as the kids get larger, and the furniture, and we won't even start talking about car stacking. We're not even going to touch that subject. But, so just know that we have exhausted everything we possibly could before bringing that recommendation.
And that is
to
definitely
you.
noted. I just anticipate because we as board members hear when buses are not showing up, and when people watch us and they hear, oh, we need 3 new buses, they're going to say, get my bus first.
Yep.
So that was where that came from. But I understand the difficulty with this, and it would be great if we had more bus drivers, and we need to do everything we can to encourage people in the community to help get our kids to school. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hershey. Ms. Caulfield?
And this might be a future discussion, but I have spoken with some staff that said that they would actually volunteer to sign on, like end of shift, and pick something up. I'm not sure how we would apply that.
It's tough because, you know, our drivers require a commercial driver's license.
Yeah.
It's not like we can just put spare buses at each
Oh,
school
sure.
and have people drive them
Yeah.
when they're free.
And then for that staff, we would have to supply
Yeah.
the CDL and everything, but.
Yeah.
So my question is really more just two clarification pieces. When you're speaking about a capped school, what percentage did you say they had to be at for it to be considered?
The reason why I phrased it the way I did is because one school that's at 105% crowding may need to be capped. Another school that's at 105% crowding may not need to be capped. It depends on how that building is laid out, whether or not I'm able to move programs and classes within the building. So there's so many factors that fall into that decision. So that's why I didn't want to give you an exact percentage, but they're typically over 100%. So then I know the question probably comes back, it's like, well, why haven't we uncapped Panther High? That's a conversation we've been having for a number of years because, again, you heard me mention a second ago, the program assumptions say 6 trailers. We have over 30-something odd trailers on that campus. So that takes us into another conversation. So you heard me share that we had done a Trailers 101 presentation recently. So when we start looking at the number of trailers that are at or above their useful life, it takes you into a whole nother series of conversations. Do we start looking at pulling trailers off of a campus, or do we look at uncapping a school and continuing to use those trailers on that site?
And somewhere along the line, I heard that it was extremely expensive to
Oh, Lord,
remove the
yes.
trailers.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's not the option too.
Yes,
And then my next part, and I know we need to move on the chart that you gave us, that we see with the additional data, I noticed, I'm just trying to understand, in the first column, it says, for example, all the way down at the bottom of the chart, this might be on the second page, it says Heritage High School 0, and on the right column, it says Roseville High School 104.5. So what does that mean when somebody, us or the public, is looking at it? What is that telling us?
So what that's telling you is that as of the day the data was pulled, we hadn't yet had to cap any students out of the school. So they hadn't hit that threshold. They hadn't hit the cap number. And then the Roseville lets you know what their current crowding rate is, even without those students being sent to there as an overflow. So we do have a particularly precarious situation in that region where we've got just generally crowded schools on both sides of it. So looking at the specific example that you came up with, Heritage High School, at the time that the data was pulled on December 19th, they had yet to hit their cap, and so they haven't yet started capping students out for the current school year.
So you're saying that this, as of their current enrollment, even
All
though they
students
are
living in,
capped,
right.
they don't have the amount of number that they, from when they were originally capped? Is that what you're
Correct.
saying?
And so what's happened is, for this school year, their cap number is set at 1,920. So at this point, their enrollment is sufficiently below that at 1,805 to where they can take on additional students that move into their base before they have to start sending them to the overflow school.
Okay, and is that on the same line as Roseville, because the two of those would work?
And so Roseville
Junction
doesn't
Club?
currently have a cap, so anybody who moves into the Roseville base is able to be served at the school, and then they would be prepared to accept any students that come to Heritage should they hit 1921. Should, 1,921 students enroll, then that first student would be sent over to Roseville.
So I guess I'm just trying to understand why they're on the same line. So Roseville is pretty close, so it would, or Heritage is capped, so it might go to, Roseville is Heritage's overflow. That's what I was trying to understand, okay. So
And-
they're close, but not quite there yet.
Yes, ma'am. And if I may share, since that's the example you used, we are in the process of adding 6 classroom trailers at Heritage High, and then immediately after that, adding 6 classroom trailers at Rollsville High. So it is our hope that that will allow us to, I don't like saying this out loud, I know, at some point in time in the future, be able to remove that cap from Heritage High School.
Do you have any idea how Wake Forest is in regards to those numbers? Because those are really the only 3 high schools we got up there.
And Wake Forest,
While she's pulling that up, and just another thing to keep in mind is that with market volatility, some of our schools have not been delivered on the timeline that we originally anticipated, which further compounds some of our needs to look at creative solutions while we're waiting for those schools to open. No fault to anything, just it is where we are.
Wake Forest high school, and I'm sorry, trying not to say Wake Forest Roseville High, I've been here a long time now, they are under 100% crowding.
Okay, so they still have some jiggle room.
Yes, ma'am.
And is there a way, because I know like land would probably be a problem, and I'm not sure if that's in this presentation, but for a private donor to provide land or funds for a school? In other words, instead of us going out, is there a way for us to, somebody had presented to me that they knew somebody that was willing to donate funds towards land purchase for schools up in our area. So I don't know what that process is or how that would work.
So, Ms. Caulfield, that is a bigger question than we have time for today. You see Ms. Parker over here.
That's exactly
who
what I was about to
can
do.
answer everything about all things real estate, but it's definitely something sometimes people will bring us donations of land, they'll offer a reduced sale of property, but then sometimes the land may not be suitable, right? It may not meet the qualifications, the minimum number of acres, or someone says, well, we've got this empty office building. Yeah, but money's always appreciated, so we can talk to Ms. Parker a little bit offline as well. Okay, anything else on that one? Okay, thank you. All right, so I do have a couple things, because this is an issue, as you know, that's very important to me. If you go back and you look at the area of the county, I mean, we represent the whole county, but I answered the phone calls and emails specifically of those voters in District 7, and if you look at District 7, a lot of these schools and a lot of these CAP schools are in northwestern Wake County. If we go back to slide 9, I want to point this out. We see a lot of the elementary schools, 1, 2, 3, 4 listed. Sycamore Creek is actually also a multi-track year-round school, but since it's coming off the list, we'll mix this one. One of the things that we hear sometimes is, well, we can solve a lot of the crowding and capping issues by just converting the schools. But here, the schools are already converted to multi-track year-round. And so when the multi-track year-round school is over capacity and capped, and if you want to keep the students on the same schedule so they could get back into the school if it's not capped or it's on the same feeder pattern as a multi-track middle, that means you have to find another multi-track year-round middle or elementary school with capacity. And so this is getting students from this area having to be capped further and further away. Parkside Elementary just opened a couple years ago, already full, already capped. They're getting capped out to Adams Elementary on the other side, on the other side of Cary. And that is not only inconvenient for the students, it puts more pressure on our transportation system. So we've talked about capping and its impact on transportation. I have to bring up, we've talked about, you need more buses to run the capped routes. The capped routes, you're taking students further from their schools. The routes are getting longer. And, we have a real crisis with transportation right now. I mean, we have to be open about that most of the communications I get, if they're not about school security, they're about transportation. I nearly couldn't make this meeting tonight because our kids' high school and middle school bus route was canceled, we worried it was going to be canceled since it had been canceled many other times this week. Thankfully, it came through and I could be here. But if we can't evaluate capping as the same option the same way that we have in past years. And so that gets us to the idea of looking at our options and trailers, our mobile classrooms. We've talked, and we had a deep dive staff did for us about the pros and cons of using the mobile classrooms. And we heard they are expensive to remove. They're not always energy efficient. There are problems, using those for instructional space. But when we weigh that against our transportation issues, again, what is the worst of several bad choices? I really think, we at the board don't necessarily need to be shuffling individual students from school to school, but as a policy, I think we need to look at some mobile classrooms and really evaluate and hear from staff about, is the impact of capping going to be worse for our transportation system than the impact of adding more mobile classrooms, more trailers to specific campuses. I looked, and I know for Sycamore Creek, which came off as a capped school, was on a site that there was no space for trailers. So we couldn't have used trailers as an option there. But I see we have 4 elementary schools on here that say that are capped, they say they have 0 trailers. And again, I don't know if more are planned, like you explained with Heritage and some of those Wake Forest area schools. A middle school. I know Parkside Elementary was designed to have some capacity trailers that aren't on site. And Parkside is capped, again, with a very distant overflow school. So is that something that we can evaluate? Has transportation changed the math so that now adding those trailers might be preferable to capping in that situation? I mean, the good news I think we have out there is that we do have new schools coming online. In this area, Mills Park is very crowded, but we will be opening the Parkside Middle School in a few years. And that will have a domino effect on some of those crowded middle schools in the area. Panther Creek, again, Chair Mahaffey had brought that up, but we will have a new Mooresville High School opening up that can allow us to kind of reshuffle some positions out there. But we don't have the elementary schools that are coming out there. And so, whereas we might be able to deal with some of these issues through new school construction that's coming, we need to look ahead. We need to look at reassignment. We need to look at trailers. And while I've always understood capping as a way to manage these growth issues, I'm really concerned about its impact on our transportation system. And I really think we need to look and reevaluate some of these other options and what we can do. And so I'll be bringing questions about some of these schools and what we might be able to do when this comes before the full board. So I know that was a lot. I apologize, but thank you for letting me get all those concerns shared. Does anyone have any final questions before we release Ms. Rory, Ms. Pulliam, and Mr. Carrozza? Yeah, we are after 5:20. We do have the forecast. Mr. Congdon, I would say we do have it shared online for all the board members. Unless you feel particularly compelled to make the presentation, can we just review that on our own and get back to you with any questions? All right. Well, in that case, unless anyone has any final urgent business, I'll just declare the meeting closed. Thank you.